He didn't just bump into her, he kicked her. In the middle of a courtroom, in front of the judge, in front of everyone. Officer Brent Collier, a white cop with 6 prior complaints, struck a quiet black woman as she stepped off the stand. He thought she'd stay quiet. He thought no one would care. But she wasn't just anyone, she was a decorated Navy SEAL. Why would a soldier trained to survive war zones be assaulted in an American courtroom? And what happens when she pushes back, not with rage, but with hard, undeniable evidence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you believe truth matters, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's stories for more real-life battles that demand to be told. Now, let's return to that courtroom in Birmingham. She didn't move much, didn't shift in her seat, didn't cross or uncross her legs like most folks do when they're nervous. Nova Bennett just sat there, 3rd row from the front, back straight, hands resting on her lap, eyes fixed. She wasn't trying to draw attention, but she wasn't hiding either. She was just watching. You could tell by the way she held herself, like someone who's been through worse than this and survived every second of it. Her little brother Tariq was sitting at the defense table about 10 feet away. He looked too young for the charges pinned on him. Skinny, shoulders hunched, eyes darting every few seconds to find her face. Every time he looked back, Nova gave him a small nod. Not much, barely a movement really, but it said everything. "I'm here. I've got you." He needed that. Across the aisle, the arresting officer leaned back in his chair like he owned the place. Officer Brent Collier. White, bulky arms crossed tight over his chest. He had that kind of smirk you don't forget, the kind that makes your stomach twist even before he opens his mouth. He chuckled at something the prosecutor whispered, not loud, but loud enough. Nova didn't flinch. She just looked at him. Once, long enough for him to notice, and then turned back to Tariq. Collier shifted his weight, puffed up like a rooster. He didn't know who she was, not yet. The judge hadn't entered yet. The room was still half-buzzing papers, shuffling lawyers, mumbling shoes, tapping the floor. You know that kind of tension that fills a room when something's about to start, but nobody wants to be the first to move. That's where we were. And Nova, she was still. Not nervous, not anxious, just still like someone who's used to waiting through worse. The door near the front opened. "Case number 6431C, the bailiff called out. "The state versus Tariq Bennett." The noise dropped like a stone. People straightened up. The prosecutor checked his notes. Tariq stood slowly. There were chains around his wrists, and the faint sound they made. It did something to the room. Made it real. One of those sounds that doesn't need to be loud to land hard. Nova's fingers pressed together a little tighter. She didn't blink. The judge came in, not young, not old. Gray hair, thick glasses, barely looked up when he sat. He tapped the gavel once. "Let's proceed." The defense attorney, a woman no older than 28, stood and cleared her throat. You could tell she hadn't slept much. "Your Honor," she said, "the defense calls our first witness, Ms. Nova Bennett." There was a pause. Just half a second longer than it needed to be. Then heads started turning. Someone near the back whispered, "Who?" Brent Collier looked over his shoulder. And for the first time that morning, his smirk faded. Nova stood. Not fast. Not dramatic. She just stood. Smooth. Quiet. Every step deliberate, like she'd measured the floor before taking it. Even the bailiff straightened up when she passed. And as she walked to the front of the courtroom, you could feel the shift. Like the air got a little heavier, like folks started paying attention, even if they weren't sure why. And that's when it hit you. She wasn't just any witness. She had the walk of someone who'd seen things, and the calm of someone who never forgot. Nova took the stand without making a sound. Her blazer was still buttoned. Her expression hadn't changed since she entered the courtroom. But as she stepped up and faced the judge, there was something about her presence, quiet, steady, unmoved, that made the room lean in a little closer. She gave her full name. Then calmly she added Petty Officer First Class, Navy SEAL, Team 7. No one said a word, but you could feel it, that shift in the air. The defense attorney asked her to walk through the night in question. She didn't perform. She didn't dramatize. She just told the truth. Tariq had been with her the whole night. He'd picked her up from the airport at 7:48 p.m. They'd gone home. A neighbor had dropped by with food and chatted with both of them in the hallway. Security footage backed it up. Around midnight, Tariq had started complaining of stomach cramps. Nova had taken him to urgent care. The discharge papers were in her file. Everything lined up. Every detail. And she said it all like she was still on a mission briefing, measured, clipped, no wasted breath. When she finished, she thanked the court, stepped down, and walked back toward her seat. Then suddenly Officer Collier moved. He rose from his chair, turned slightly into the aisle, and stuck out his knee just as Nova passed by. The impact wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. Nova's body jolted from the hit. She didn't fall, but she staggered half a step, caught herself, and stood still. You could have heard a pin drop. The judge hadn't seen it clearly. Neither had the clerk. But everyone in the gallery had, especially the little girl sitting in the back row. She turned to her mom and whispered, not quietly enough, "Why did that man kick her?" No one answered. Nova didn't lash out. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the witness stand to steady herself. Then she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge hesitated, glanced toward Collier, then gave her a single nod. Nova stepped forward slowly. The room seemed to hold its breath. "I've jumped from helicopters under fire," she began. "I've had IEDs go off so close the ground shook under my feet. I've carried teammates off the field who never made it home." Her voice didn't tremble. "But I've never been attacked by a police officer. Not in a courtroom, not in my country." The silence was absolute. The judge's face tightened. "Officer Collier, please step outside, now." Collier didn't move at first. His smirk had vanished. Then he glanced at the bailiff who was already heading toward him, hand resting near her holster. He stood muttering, and as he passed by Nova, he leaned in and hissed, "You just made a mistake." Nova didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed forward. But she said quietly, "So did you." He walked out. The doors closed behind him. For a few long seconds, no one said a thing. Then someone coughed. A chair creaked. And just like that, the room remembered it was a courtroom again. But the story had changed. It wasn't just about Tariq anymore. Not just a robbery charge. It was about what had just happened on record in open court to a black woman who had served this country. Outside, a local reporter was already setting up a tripod. By the time Nova sat down again, a live stream had started. And back in the third row, that little girl was still watching. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was quieter than it should have been. Tariq sat on the bench, his shoulders hunched, fingers nervously tapping the bench edge. His tie had loosened since morning, and there was a trembling in his jaw that he didn't bother to hide anymore. Nova stood just behind him, arms folded, watching him for a moment before sitting beside him. She didn't say anything at first. Neither did he. Then, barely louder than a breath, Tariq whispered, "They want me to take the deal." Nova turned her head. He still wouldn't look at her. 3 years. If I plead guilty. They said, with how it's going, I might not get better than that. She waited for him to finish. They said the jury sees me as angry, that I look volatile. He paused, that my silence comes off as guilt. Nova leaned in, her voice soft but crisp. "Did you do it?" He shook his head. Immediately. Desperately. "No, I swear. I was home. You know I was." "I do," she said. "But that's not what matters to them. What matters is how easy it is to shut the door on you." Tariq blinked fast. "I don't want to die in there, Nova." Her heart twisted at that. He sounded 12 again, just like when their dad left and Tariq clung to her in the middle of the night. Nova's voice dropped even lower. "If you didn't do it and you signed that paper anyway, it won't be 3 years. He looked at her. She nodded. "It'll be a sentence you carry for the rest of your life." Tariq bit his lip, then muttered, "They said this judge doesn't like people who talk back, that she's tough on black defendants." Nova didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence was heavy enough to answer for her. At the end of the hall, the courtroom doors opened briefly. Officer Collier stepped out, pretending to scroll his phone, but Nova saw at the brief look he shot in their direction. Cold, controlled. And then Marcus appeared, rushing up with a folded sheet of paper in hand. "Hey, I just printed the hospital badge logs. They've got timestamps of you both there, it's solid." Nova took the paper, eyes scanning. "Good, get ready. We'll need these verified before closing." Marcus hesitated, then leaned in closer. "You know who that cop is, right?" She looked up. Brent Collier. I didn't connect it earlier. He used to patrol near Montgomery. 2 years ago, your office investigated him for intimidation and false reporting. Nothing ever stuck. But it got heated. Nova stared at him. He knows who you are, Nova. For a second, the hallway shrank. That sharp look Collier gave her earlier. It wasn't casual. It was personal. Nova said nothing, but inside her pulse beat colder now. This wasn't just about Tariq. This was about her, too. A quiet grudge carried into a courtroom. She folded the paper, slowly slipped it into her folder, and looked back at Tariq. He was trying not to cry. She reached out, pulled him into a loose hug, and let him lean his head against her shoulder. Her arms wrapped around his frame, grown but still her baby brother. "You're not alone," she said. And then she looked up. Straight ahead, past the vending machines, past the broken tiles and beige walls, toward the double doors that led back into the courtroom, where people wore robes and uniforms and talked about justice. But not always truth. She didn't say it aloud, but she thought it, they want you to fold, because it's easier than admitting the system is broken. And folding would be letting them win. It was just past 6 when Nova stepped into the parking lot. The sun was low, casting long slanted shadows across the asphalt. Her heels clicked once, twice, then stopped. Someone leaned against the hood of a gray sedan near her car. Gray suit, clean lines, still posture. Malik Rowe, Nova said, almost smiling. "Last time I saw you, we were crawling out of a chopper in Helmand." The man in the suit straightened. He was leaner now, a few more grays at the temples, but those sharp, quiet eyes hadn't changed. "I figured you'd remember," Malik replied. His voice was low, controlled. "You always had better memory than me." Nova looked around. The lot was mostly empty. One security camera above the gate, burnt-out light near the stairwell. She nodded toward his car. "You following me, Rowe?" "No," he said. "Just watching your 6." That got her attention. He glanced over his shoulder, then stepped closer. "We have a problem." Nova's smile faded. "Collier filed a formal complaint. Federal level. Says you threatened him after court. Claims you used your military background to intimidate a sworn officer." She stared. "That's a lie." "I know," Malik said quietly. "But it's in the system now. And worse, someone's trying to suppress the courtroom security footage from this morning." Nova's jaw tightened, of him kicking me. "Disappearing as we speak. My guy inside called me. It's being relabeled as a glitch incident. Not deleted yet, just reassigned. You know what that means." Nova took a slow breath. "They're cleaning it up." Malik nodded. "You've made some enemies, Nova. Quiet ones, the kind that don't show up in daylight." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she looked him in the eye. "You didn't have to come." "I did," he said. "You're not just anyone to me. And I don't trust how fast this thing is moving." From the corner of her eye, Nova caught motion. A black SUV glided past the lot entrance. No headlights, no music, just smooth, slow movement. It didn't turn in, didn't stop. But in the back window, a faint red light blinked. Once, twice, gone. Nova's hand clenched her keys. "They were outside my house last night too," she said. Malik said nothing. He just scanned the street with that same calculating look he always had overseas, measuring exit points, drawing invisible maps. Nova reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a tiny scrap of folded paper. She unfolded it, scribbled a name. Terrence Holt. She handed it to Malik. He was one of Collier's old cases. Picked up for loitering and resisting arrest. No weapon, no priors. Disappeared last year. No update in any system. I checked 3. Malik took the paper. "You think there's a list?" "I think there's a pattern," she said. He looked at her for a long second. "Be careful, Nova." She half smiled. "You said that before we stepped off the bird in Kandahar. And you ignored me then, too," he muttered. She watched as he turned and got into the gray sedan, then pulled out slow, no hurry. No attention. Nova stood there a moment longer, feeling the faint sting of wind through her blazer. She looked up at the sky. The sun had dipped behind the courthouse tower. The air smelled like warm concrete and the leftover tension of people who didn't quite say everything they meant. She exhaled once, then walked back to her car, her steps quieter than before. She waited until the house was completely still. The light in Tariq's room had gone out an hour ago. Outside, the neighborhood lay quiet under the weight of midnight, with only the occasional sweep of headlights breaking through the blinds. Nova sat in the dark at her kitchen table, the only illumination coming from the soft blue glow of an old laptop, one she hadn't touched in years. She took a slow breath, then lifted the lid. It powered on with a low hum, slower than she remembered. But it still worked. Still carried the remnants of a life she had tried to leave behind, back when her job wasn't defending her brother, but extracting people from war zones and decrypting data under fire. She reached into a small envelope taped to the underside of the table, pulled out a login code. It wasn't supposed to work anymore. But it did. 10 digits. 1 click. She was in. What she needed wasn't stored on the courtroom database. That had already been scrubbed, cleaned, sanitized. What she wanted was buried deeper. Behind firewalls only a few in the country knew existed, let alone knew how to bypass. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with quiet precision. Not fast. Not frantic. Just focused. Every move deliberate. Every file path etched into muscle memory. She didn't blink when a warning flashed across the screen. Access suspicious. Monitoring enabled. She just kept typing. 3 directories in, she found it. The folder was misnamed Maintenance Logs, Floor 2. But when she opened it, there it was. Grainy, uncut, unedited. The original courthouse surveillance footage time-stamped. Labeled clearly, with audio. She clicked play. There was no sound at first. Just courtroom chatter, a bailiff moving. Then her own voice calm answering questions on the stand. Then silence. And then, that moment, Nova watched herself stepping down from the witness box clutching her file. Brent Collier, positioned 2 feet away, made no effort to move. Instead, his leg shifted fast sharp and struck her square in the hip. She flinched, staggered, regained her balance, and he smirked. Nova paused the video, just sat there staring at the frame. He didn't look angry, or afraid. He looked satisfied, like it was a message, not just to her but to someone else who might be watching. She exhaled slowly and began to copy the file. Not once, 3 times. One onto an encrypted flash drive she tucked into the battery compartment of a broken smoke detector. Another onto a portable hard drive sealed inside an old first aid kit in her car. And the last burned to a DVD she slid into a children's book on the shelf by the window. The People Could Fly. Her mother's favorite. She moved quietly, methodically. Not a single unnecessary step. Just muscle memory, sharp, silent, trained. Then the lights flickered. Once, then again. She froze. The overhead camera in her hallway blinked red, then went dark. Nova didn't panic. She didn't grab her phone, didn't whisper or pray. She just moved. She closed the laptop, powered it down, slipped it into a storage bin under the sink. She knew the signs. This wasn't paranoia. This was protocol. A red camera, a power flicker, a brief network drop. Classic sweep tactic. Someone had eyes on her, and they wanted her to know it. She went to the window but kept herself low out of sight. Outside the street was empty. Too empty. Then from the corner a black SUV crawled past. No lights. Just the faint gleam of a red diode behind the front windshield. Surveillance grade. Unmarked. Nova crouched by the wall and waited. When the SUV finally turned the corner and disappeared, she rose and went to her hallway closet. Pulled out an old duffel bag. Inside were her boots, her documents, and a burner phone wrapped in foil. She didn't dial. Not yet. She wasn't ready to bring anyone else in. Not until she had proof. But she knew something for sure now. This wasn't just about her brother. This was personal. And coordinated. And somewhere between Brent's smirk and the blinking red light, she had crossed a line. A line they didn't expect her to recognize. A line they thought she'd be too scared to step over. But they'd forgotten something important. Nova Bennett didn't just fight overseas. She made it home. And now they were in her territory. 2 days after the clip went viral, Brent Collier appeared on a morning news show sitting stiffly in a navy suit flanked by a union lawyer. He didn't apologize. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands folded, and calmly said into the camera, "Ms. Bennett is a veteran, yes. But she's also shown signs of emotional instability. She threatened me in the courtroom. What you saw was me defending myself." The host didn't challenge him. And just like that, the same old playbook was reopened. Nova watched from the kitchen counter, coffee in her hand, gone cold. Her fingers tapped the rim of the mug slowly, rhythmically. Not in fear, not even in anger, but recognition. Malik texted 2 words. "It's starting." Another message came through seconds later. "They're pulling your classified files." Everything. She replied with one sentence, let them. But the machine moved fast. By afternoon, anonymous accounts were sharing snippets of her deployment logs out of context, misquoted. A blog post hinted she'd once fired on civilians during a chaotic skirmish in Kandahar, something long since investigated and dismissed. They weren't aiming for truth. They were aiming for doubt. That night, Nova sat in the dark, no lights on in the living room. Tariq was asleep on the couch beside her, finally breathing evenly. And then a notification lit up her screen. Live stream. Username @HoltT. Caption. 2 years is enough. She clicked. The camera was shaky, grainy, the fluorescent lighting of a group home hallway flickering behind a teenage boy with tired eyes and a hoodie zipped all the way to his chin. He looked barely 16. He didn't say hello. Didn't wait for viewers to join. He just began. My name is Terrence Holt. I've been in Pine Hill Recovery Center since I was 15. They said I had episodes, that I heard voices. A pause, a swallow. I don't. I hear memories. I remember things I wasn't supposed to. The chat filled slowly, heart emojis blinking beside shocked comments. I remember Officer Brent Collier slamming me against a wall outside Miller's Grocery. I remember him planting something in my backpack. I remember the look on his face when I started crying like he was proud of it. Another pause. I was waiting for my grandma. I didn't do anything, but no one listened. Not the court. Not my lawyer. And I was scared, so I stayed quiet. He looked straight into the lens. But I saw the video of what he did to Ms. Bennett. And I can't stay quiet anymore. Silence. Just the hum of the old HVAC system behind him. I don't know if this will help, but I know it's the truth. And if someone like her, if she can be hurt and still stand up, then maybe I can too. He ended the stream. Less than 10 minutes. But it shook something wide open. Within hours, Terrence's name was trending. His juvenile record had been sealed, but his truth wasn't. Mental health advocates began quoting him. Civil rights groups called for an immediate investigation into all of Brent Collier's arrests over the past 6 years. A CNN analyst said bluntly, "When even a child locked away in silence finds the courage to speak, you know the dam is breaking." Nova didn't say much that night. She didn't post, didn't comment. Just sat at the edge of her bed phone on the nightstand screen still lit with the words, 2 years is enough. She whispered it to herself like a vow, and for the first time in days, she closed her eyes and rested. The courtroom was packed. More packed than anyone had seen in years. Not because of the case, but because of what the country had already witnessed. The clip of Officer Collier's assault had traveled far beyond Birmingham. It aired on primetime news, replayed by pundits, dissected on every podcast, and shared by people who rarely talked about justice until now. Outside, a quiet crowd had gathered. No signs, no shouting, just presence. Some wore uniforms, some carried books, but most simply stood, as if their being there was the loudest message they could give. Inside, Nova sat in the front row this time. No third-row shadows, no hesitation. Her posture steady, her expression unreadable, the look of someone who's walked through fire and come out with no need to prove it. Tariq sat beside her, his hands still, but his knees bouncing just enough to betray the weight he carried. The door opened, not the usual prosecutor. A new face stepped in, younger, sharper eyes, clear of the usual political fog. She approached the bench, voice firm but measured. "Your Honor, the District Attorney's Office respectfully declines to pursue this prosecution. We are withdrawing all charges against Mr. Tariq Bennett, effective immediately." A murmur swept through the room, not loud but unmistakable. It was the sound of breath being held, and then finally released. Judge Kellerman, a seasoned man who'd presided over hundreds of these, looked over his glasses, tapped his pen once on the desk, and cleared his throat. "Very well, Mr. Bennett, you are free to go." The gavel landed with a clean, simple thud. But in that silence, something monumental shifted. Tariq didn't move at first. It took a beat before he stood, then another before he turned to Nova. She nodded once, and he nodded back. That was it. No dramatic tears, no clapping, just two siblings, rising. As they stepped into the hallway, the air was different. A line of people stood waiting, not blocking, not crowding, just watching, as if bearing witness was its own kind of justice. Then someone asked a woman holding a microphone. Her voice soft but urgent. "Ms. Bennett, will you be pressing charges against Officer Collier?" Nova stopped. turned gently toward the camera, her blazer still perfectly in place, hair pulled back with military precision, a faint trace of exhaustion beneath her eyes, but her stance never faltered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She just smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't ask for applause because it already knows the answer. "We don't need to," she said, and then a pause like punctuation made of air. Justice already filed the case itself. That was all she said. But in that moment it was enough. The clip went viral within an hour. Again. Not for the drama, but for the dignity, for the power of restraint, for the way silence, when carried by truth, can shake more walls than fury ever could. Later that evening, a news anchor closed the segment with a single line. Some stories don't need a courtroom to reach a verdict. They just need to be seen. And Nova, she didn't stay to celebrate. She walked her brother to the car, buckled his seatbelt, and drove them home in silence, windows down, night air folding into their breaths like a kind of freedom. No flashing lights, no declarations, just the long, slow exhale of a truth that finally had room to breathe. Brent Collier was officially indicted on 3 federal counts: excessive force under color of law, obstruction of justice, and retaliatory assault against a witness. The courtroom where he once smirked and swaggered now held his mugshot on every screen. But the headlines didn't stop there. A week later, a front-page expose hit the presses. Not just online, but old-school folded newspapers delivered on porches slid into diner booths held between trembling hands at bus stops. The Brent Doctrine. How one officer shielded a decade of abuse. The piece was written by Eleanor Price, a veteran journalist who'd been covering law enforcement misconduct longer than Brent had worn a badge. Her report named names: supervisors who signed off without reading, IA investigators who lost files, and the sudden transfers of whistleblowers, including one Malik Rowe. When asked for comment, the department's statement was brief. Agent Rowe has been reassigned pending internal review. No denial, no apology, just the language of systems trying to quietly patch what they can't publicly admit. Nova read the article at her kitchen table. Same place she'd eaten cereal as a girl, same window her father used to lean against drinking black coffee in silence. Now it was her reflection staring back, older, sharper, carrying years that hadn't been hers to begin with. The morning sun slipped in through the blinds, casting slow-moving stripes across the floor. She held a photo in her hand. Her father in uniform, military blues, stern face, and a smile that only just touched the corners. Taken 2 months before he was arrested. He'd spent 9 years clearing his name, and never got his full pension. Nova whispered, not expecting an answer. "Your granddaughter did what you couldn't." She set the photo upright on the shelf. No ceremony, no big moment, just a promise kept, in full view. Outside, the city was waking up. A local college announced a symposium on police accountability, citing Nova's case as a turning point. High school debate teams were choosing her story for mock trials. Even a neighborhood mural was starting to take shape, blue and gold paint, tracing her outline not as a victim, but as a woman standing tall with no caption. But Nova didn't go out to see it. She stayed inside. Let the world spin on without her for a moment. She brewed tea, took it without sugar the way her grandfather had. And when her phone buzzed, she glanced but didn't answer. The world could wait 5 more minutes. This wasn't victory. Not yet. Too many names. Too many stories like Tariq's. Too many families who never got their footage back. But it was something. Something that cracked through the concrete, a truth that couldn't be ignored and wouldn't be buried this time. Because this time, someone stayed in the 3rd row, watched, remembered, didn't flinch. And when the moment came, she stood. It was the first quiet evening in weeks. No pounding on the door. No phone buzzing with threats. No courtroom summons or camera crews waiting out front. Just the clinking of silverware in a small kitchen. And breathing. Steady, unshaken breathing. Tariq was seated at the tablespoon in one hand, slice of cornbread in the other. He wasn't looking over his shoulder, wasn't flinching at every passing car. For the first time since this all began, he wasn't shaking. Across the room, Nova watched him, not as a soldier, not as a strategist, just as a sister. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. She stepped out to the balcony. The night air wrapped around her like an old friend, cool, quiet, honest. Birmingham stretched out below, lights blinking like sleepy eyes. Somewhere downtown, someone was still spray painting justice for Tariq on a wall. But up here, there was no chanting, no spotlight. Just the creaking of the old wooden chair as she sat down. She pulled out the flag. It had been folded for years. Crisp corners, faded stars, the same flag that once draped her father's casket, before they knew he'd been framed. She didn't unfold it to mourn him. She unfolded it to remember him. To remember the man who told her when she was 10, truth never knocks loud, but it always finds a way in. She ran her fingers along the stitching. Her father had held this flag in war. She had held it in court. Now it rested on her lap still for the first time. A soft vibration in her pocket broke the silence. It was a message from Malik. 3 words. They want you. Then another. Reform Committee. They're asking for you to advise. Nova stared at the screen. A week ago, they were scrubbing her from footage. Now they wanted her to shape the system. She didn't laugh, didn't gloat. She just typed. I don't advise I rewrite the playbook. No emoji, no period. Just truth folded sharp like the flag on her lap. Inside, Tariq rinsed his plate. The boy who once mumbled through every sentence now stood taller. Not cured, not yet, but stitched back together with something steadier than fear. He stepped outside barefoot on the cold tile and leaned against the railing beside his sister. They didn't speak for a moment. Didn't need to. Then he looked at her, voice low, heart wide open. You're the reason I believe justice is real. She didn't respond right away, because how do you respond to that? So she just placed her hand on his, warm, firm, familiar. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, but it wasn't coming for them. Not tonight. Because tonight wasn't about protest, it wasn't about evidence or exposure or vengeance. Tonight was about the soft things that survive the fire. The voice of a younger brother unbroken. The quiet hands of a sister who refused to back down. The old flag that still stood for something not because of what it represented, but because of who had dared to carry it forward. Nova leaned back looking at the sky. The stars didn't blink any differently. But somehow, everything had changed. Not the world. Not yet. But something closer. Something quieter. The part of you that hopes, even after all hope was supposed to burn out. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what laws would pass, what backlash might follow, but she knew this. The rules were different now, because someone had stood up in the 3rd row and didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't forget. If this story stirred something in you even just for a moment, we invite you to pause and reflect on why. Nova didn't carry a weapon. She carried truth. She didn't shout for power. She stood in silence and made the system speak. And in doing so, she reminded us all, justice doesn't always wear a robe or a badge. Sometimes it wears scars. And sometimes it walks in wearing nothing but courage and a folded flag. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe voices like Nova's deserve to be heard, then please like this video. Share it with someone who still believes change is possible. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful true-to-life narratives that shine a light where others look away. Your support isn't just a number to us. It's the reason we keep going. It's what gives us the strength to keep telling the stories others are afraid to tell. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And above all, thank you for remembering.